be honest with yourself for a second. Have you ever had one of those days, or I mean, maybe it's been weeks, where your brain is just running a million miles an hour, but your physical body feels completely, utterly drained?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like you are pinned to the couch, your limbs feel like lead, yet mentally you are just sprinting through this gauntlet of to-do lists and anxieties.
It's an incredibly common feeling, especially among high performers. And yet it represents one of the most fundamentally misunderstood physiological states that the human body can actually experience.
Yeah. And so our mission today is to decode exactly what is happening under the hood when you feel that way. We are doing a deep dive into this fascinating article titled Understanding Stress alongside its German counterpart, Raus aus der Stressfalle, which translates to escaping the stress trap.
And trap is a hauntingly accurate word here, honestly.
It really is. We're going to look at how stress basically hijacks your biology. And because we are looking at this through the lens of the My-Nutri-Diary app and, healthy aging strategies, we're going to focus heavily on how this alters your nutrition, your cellular health, and crucially, how to actually break out of that cycle.
Right, because stress is essentially an omnipresent force. You really cannot engineer a life without it.
No, it's impossible.
Right, it bleeds in from work, family dynamics, financial pressures, health concerns. So the goal isn't elimination. As the source material points out, stress doesn't just put you in a bad mood. It actually physically remodels your internal organs and alters your metabolic pathways.
Wow, remodels your organs.
Yeah.
To sort of visualize what is happening inside us, I like to think about the body's stress response like a building's commercial fire alarm system.
Okay, I like that.
Right, because that system is a masterpiece of engineering if a literal fire breaks out. You want the sirens blaring, you want the strobe lights flashing, the sprinkler system soaking everything, and you want all non-essential power shut down so people can just evacuate.
Exactly, it's designed to save the building in an emergency.
But consider the damage if that system triggers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, while you are just trying to sit at your desk and, I don't know, read a report.
Right, it would be chaos.
The noise drives you to madness, the water rots the drywall, and the building effectively destroys itself from the inside out just by trying to protect you.
That captures the destructive nature of the response perfectly.
Yeah.
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 But before we examine the biological water damage, so to speak,
Yeah.
the sources categorize the triggers into three distinct phases of stress.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first category is acute stress. This is your evolutionary standard. It's triggered by highly unusual immediate events.
Like almost getting into a car crash.
Exactly. You swerve to avoid a car in traffic, or you have a sudden, really heated argument. The defining characteristic here is brevity. Your biological alarms trigger, you deal right then and there with the threat, and the system resets.
Without leaving any permanent damage.
Right. No long-term harm.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because I feel like the wellness industry often pushes this narrative that all stress is toxic, right? Like we need to exist in this permanent state of zen.
Oh, absolutely. Which isn't realistic or even healthy.
Exactly. Acute stress actually sounds functional. Like if we think of our brain as a computer, acute stress is just the CPU fan kicking into high gear for a few minutes while you render a massive video file.
That's a great way to put it.
It's loud, but it actually prevents the system from crashing. It's like a quick sprint to catch a bus. It's helpful.
The human body is entirely equipped to handle that temporary overdrive. The complications arise with the second category, which is acute episodic stress.
Okay, episodic. What does that look like?
This occurs when you are frequently triggering that alarm. Think of a lifestyle where you are perpetually racing against tight work deadlines or, juggling way more responsibilities than you have hours in the day.
So it's not just one sprint to catch the bus, it's being forced to run multiple sprints all day long?
Precisely. You are constantly forcing that CPU fan to spin up, and over time, the bearings in that fan start to wear out.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. The text warns that if you ignore the physical and emotional friction caused by this episodic stress, it starts cascading to actual clinical health issues.
I mean, I can see how bouncing from one crisis to another is draining, but it still seems like there are, brief pauses in between. But the third type identified in the text, chronic stress, that sounds fundamentally different.
It's a completely different beast.
Like if episodic stress is wearing out the fan bearings, chronic stress sounds like downloading background malware that just constantly overclocks the motherboard until it physically melts. Or like being forced into a marathon with absolutely no finish line.
That is the terrifying reality of chronic stress, yes. It stems from inescapable long-term situations. We're talking about enduring toxic work environments, long-term emotional abuse, or carrying the weight of deep, unresolved financial struggles.
The heavy stuff that you can't just fix in an afternoon.
Exactly. And the reason this metaphorical malware melts the motherboard is that your central nervous system never actually receives the biological signal to return to its baseline.
Uh, the fire alarm never gets the all-clear code.
Your body remains locked in a state of high alert indefinitely. This is where we see lasting physiological and psychological devastation. And the mechanism of that devastation is driven by a very specific and highly disruptive chemical cascade.
Okay, I want to look closely at that chemical cascade. When our brain perceives a threat and pulls that fire alarm, what is the actual sequence of events inside the bloodstream?
Well, we initiate the classic fight-or-flight mechanism. The sympathetic nervous system engages instantly.
The sympathetic nervous system, that's the accelerator, right?
Exactly. Within milliseconds, your adrenal glands, which sit just above your kidneys, they pump adrenaline directly into your bloodstream.
Okay.
Adrenaline is your immediate action hormone. It aggressively speeds up your heart rate, dilates your airways to force more oxygen into your blood, and sharpens your mental alertness to a razor's edge. Your muscles are instantly primed for explosive physical action.
I've totally felt that, like your vision sort of tunnels, your hands might shake a little bit, you feel almost hyper alive. It's an incredible biological feature if you actually need to sprint away from a physical danger.
It's brilliant for survival. But if the threat doesn't resolve in those first few minutes, the body transitions to its secondary response.
Which is what?
It releases cortisol.
Ah, the famous stress hormone.
Right. Cortisol's primary function in this survival state is to flood your system with glucose. It signals your liver to just dump its stored sugars into the bloodstream so your brain and muscles have this massive supply of rapid energy to keep fighting or fleeing.
Makes sense. You need fuel for the fire.
But cortisol also acts as this ruthless middle manager. It actively shuts down any bodily systems that do not contribute to surviving the next 5 minutes.
Okay, wait. This is where I am struggling to understand the evolutionary logic. I mean, shutting down non-essential systems makes perfect sense if I'm literally running away from a bear. I don't need to digest my lunch or, grow new cells if I'm about to be eaten.
Exactly.
But why on earth does my body trigger this exact same nuclear option, shutting down organs and flooding my veins with sugar just because I have a Tuesday work deadline? Or because I got an annoying email?
Because the brain struggles to distinguish between them. The human brain has evolved these incredible capacities for abstract thought, but the primitive limbic system, the part governing your survival, cannot tell the difference between a physical threat and a psychological one.
So it treats a mean email like a tiger.
Essentially, yes. The architecture of a stress response was forged hundreds of thousands of years ago in environments where stressors were almost exclusively acute life or death physical dangers.
Right.
When you read that threatening email or you look at a past due bill, your brain registers emotional distress. The limbic system interprets that distress as a literal threat to your existence. It willingly sacrifices long-term bodily upkeep for what it perceives as short-term survival.
Wow. Which explains the severe long-term consequences mentioned in the source material. I mean, we aren't just talking about a temporary stomachache here.
No, not at all.
The text specifically links elevated cortisol to central adiposity, which is the accumulation of belly fat. Why does the body specifically choose the belly to store fat when we are stressed?
It comes down to the density of cortisol receptors. Visceral fat, which is the deep fat stored around your abdominal organs, has a significantly higher concentration of cortisol receptors compared to the subcutaneous fat you'd find on your legs or arms.
Oh, interesting.
Right, so when cortisol levels remain chronically high, it signals the body to relocate lipid stores directly to the abdomen.
But why there?
Efficiency. Visceral fat is highly metabolically active, and it sits right next to the liver. The body is essentially stockpiling fuel as close to the processing plant as possible so it can rapidly convert it to glucose for this endless perceived threat.
But packing active fat around vital organs has to be incredibly dangerous.
It is highly toxic. Central adiposity dramatically increases your risk for type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and hormone-dependent cancers like breast cancer.
That's terrifying.
And it gets worse. Because cortisol permanently suppresses those non-essential systems, you develop chronic elevated blood pressure, severe inflammatory skin conditions, and even infertility, Plus, deep clinical depression because the brain's neurotransmitter production gets totally disrupted.
Oh, man. I'm putting the pieces together on another symptom here.
Yeah,
If cortisol suppresses the immune system and actively reduces blood flow to the digestive tract to save energy, that perfectly explains the connection to stomach ulcers.
you're exactly right.
Because your stomach lining needs a robust blood supply to regenerate and, protect itself from its own acid. If cortisol restricts that blood flow, the lining weakens and the acid just burns right through it.
You've identified the exact mechanism behind stress-induced gastritis and gastric ulcers. The protective mucosal barrier just degrades, leaving the stomach totally vulnerable to its own digestive juices and
Ah.
even bacterial infections like H. pylori.
But that biological reality leads to a huge contradiction for me.
How so?
Well, if my digestion is essentially offline and my stomach lining is compromised, my appetite should theoretically be zero, right?
Logically, yes.
Yet, when I am stressed, my diet completely falls apart. I immediately crave a giant pizza or a huge box of donuts.
Hmm.
Why is my brain demanding heavy food when my stomach is in absolutely no condition to process it?
You are hitting on the core of the diet stress loop here.
Yeah.
And this is highly relevant to the nutrition tracking aspects that people use the My-Nutri-Diary app for.
Right.
Chronic stress burns an astronomical amount of energy because your body believes that it's fighting a continuous war.
So it wants calories.
Exactly. The demand for fuel is relentless. But the craving for pizza or donuts, that isn't a failure of your personal willpower. It is actual biochemical manipulation.
Biochemical manipulation.
Yes. High cortisol directly binds to receptors in the brain's reward centers, specifically driving these intense cravings for hyperpalatable foods. We're talking things packed with refined sugars, unhealthy fats, and just really dense calories.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The sources detail how these hormones go even further and actively dismantle our sense of fullness.
They systematically dismantle your appetite regulation. When cortisol remains elevated, it actively suppresses the production of leptin.
Leptin is the fullness one, right?
Right. Leptin is your satiety hormone. It's the chemical messenger that tells your brain, we have enough energy, you can stop eating now.
But cortisol shuts that down,
Exactly. And simultaneously, chronic stress stimulates the production of ghrelin.
which does the opposite.
Ghrelin is the hormone that basically screams, we're starving, eat everything in sight.
So, if I can use another analogy, being in this hormonal state is like driving a car with a broken gas gauge while someone pushes the accelerator to the floor.
That's a perfect analogy.
You crave high-octane fuel like sugar. Your body's full signal leptin is completely muted, and your empty signal ghrelin is just screaming at you. It's no wonder people struggle to maintain a healthy diet under pressure.
You can't fight biology with just willpower. The internal data is entirely corrupted. The My-Nutri-Diary app focuses heavily on ensuring users meet their micronutrient needs, but this stress-eating loop destroys that balance.
Because you're eating junk.
Right, you consume thousands of empty calories that lack vitamins and minerals. Plus, those ongoing stomach issues you mentioned earlier, they actively blocks the absorption of whatever actual nutrients you do manage to consume.
It's a total trap.
And this chaos inevitably spills over into your circadian rhythm, too.
Oh, I imagine having a bloodstream completely full of cortisol and glucose makes it pretty difficult to fall asleep.
It completely obliterates your sleep architecture. In a healthy nervous system, cortisol operates on a steep curve. It surges in the early morning to pull you out of sleep and give you energy for the day. Then it gradually declines, reaching its absolute lowest point late at night so melatonin can take over.
But chronic stress messes with that curve.
It flatlines it. Your cortisol stays artificially high at 11:00 p.m. This blocks deep, restorative sleep, leading to frequent awakenings and insomnia.
And a lack of sleep is itself a massive physical stressor, which tells the body to produce even more cortisol the next day just to keep you awake.
Exactly. It is a terrifying, self-reinforcing loop of biological degradation.
A loop that actively accelerates the aging process at a cellular level, right?
Very much so.
So if our internal gauges for hunger, fullness, and fatigue are completely broken by chronic stress, we clearly cannot trust our own feelings to gauge if our nervous system is overwhelmed. I mean, we're basically flying blind before we crash. We have to look at the data.
We do. And the sources offer a very compelling technological solution for this.
Smartwatch.
Exactly. Using smartwatches to track heart rate variability, or HRV. Many modern smartwatches and fitness trackers measure this continuously now.
Okay, so what exactly is HRV?
HRV tracks the microscopic variation in time intervals between your consecutive heartbeats. It acts as an indicator of the balance between your sympathetic system, the fight or flight, and your parasympathetic system, which is the rest and digest state.
So what does this all mean? Because intuitively, shouldn't a perfectly steady heartbeat, ticking away perfectly like a metronome, be a sign of a healthy, calm body?
What's fascinating here is that you actually want the exact opposite.
Wait, really? You want an uneven heartbeat?
You want high variation between the beats, yes. A high degree of variation in those milliseconds is the hallmark of a resilient, adaptable nervous system.
Okay, explain that. Why?
Well, your heart rate is controlled by those two competing branches we talked about.
Uh,
The sympathetic branch, the accelerator, tries to speed the heart up. The parasympathetic branch, the brake pedal, controlled largely by your vagus nerve, tries to slow it down.
so the variation is the result of those two systems constantly pulling back and forth, like a tug of war.
Precisely. When you inhale, the vagus nerve briefly reduces its braking force, and your heart speeds up slightly to circulate oxygenated blood. When you exhale, the vagus nerve re-engages, and your heart slows down.
Ah, okay.
So, a high HRV indicates that your vagus nerve is highly active, and your heart is beautifully responsive to its environment. It shows biological flexibility.
Which means a low variation, a heart that beats like a rigid, unchanging metronome, is actually a massive red flag.
It is the biological signature of chronic stress. A persistently low HRV indicates that the vagus nerve has essentially withdrawn, and your body is locked rigidly into that sympathetic stress state.
The biological accelerator is just pinned to the floor.
Exactly. You've lost the adaptive flexibility to handle even minor daily challenges. Your smartwatch is essentially tapping you on the wrist to tell you that your internal fire alarm is deafening.
Wow. Okay, so once your watch tells you your HRV is dangerously low and you are locked in fight or flight, what do you actually do to escape the trap?
The deep dive covers 4 main actionable strategies from the text: sleep, physical activity, micro breaks, and mindfulness meditation.
Let's break those down. How do they specifically reverse the biological damage we've been talking about?
Well, they act as physiological interventions to manually engage the parasympathetic nervous system. Let's look at sleep first.
Okay.
Prioritizing high-quality sleep isn't just about feeling rested. It's about engaging the glymphatic system in the brain.
Glymphatic with a G.
Yes, during deep sleep, the brain's cellular structure actually shrinks slightly. This allows cerebrospinal fluid to literally wash through the tissue and clear out the toxic metabolic waste proteins that accumulate during waking hours, especially during high-stress hours.
That is incredible. The brain literally washes itself.
Right, and without that clearance, cognitive decline just accelerates.
That makes the focus on sleep hygiene incredibly urgent. And the second strategy, physical activity. That seems like a direct counterattack on the chemical cascade we discussed.
It really is.
Like, if my body has flooded my veins with glucose and adrenaline because it thinks I need to physically fight a predator, going for a brisk walk or a run is literally using those chemicals for their intended purpose.
Right. You are physically metabolizing the stress hormones. Even moderate activities like a daily walk burn off that excess blood sugar before it can be stored as visceral belly fat. And it forces the cardiovascular system to do the work it was primed for.
Giving it an outlet.
Exactly. And once a physical exertion ends, the body naturally initiates a parasympathetic recovery phase. This lowers your cortisol, begins raising your HRV.
The third strategy, micro breaks, is totally fascinating because it tackles that episodic stress we talked about earlier.
Right, the multiple daily sprints.
Yeah. Taking short, frequent breaks throughout the day. I mean, taking a 5-minute break away from your screen every hour feels so counterproductive when you have a massive deadline. How does stepping away actually help your productivity?
It interrupts the sympathetic loop. When you stare intensely at a screen under pressure, your breathing naturally becomes shallow and rapid. This actually signals to the brain that you are in danger.
Oh, because you're breathing like you're panicked.
Exactly. A micro break, standing up, looking at a distant object, taking a few deep breaths, forces the diaphragm to expand. This physically stimulates the vagus nerve, sending a direct signal back to the brain that the environment is safe.
Wow.
It literally halts the adrenal glands from pumping out more cortisol.
So it's a manual override for the fire alarm.
Precisely. And the final piece is mindfulness meditation.
Oh, yeah. The source material actually features this line drawing of a person sitting calmly in a lotus pose with the caption, "Transform stress into strength." What is biologically happening during that meditation?
Mindfulness practices, specifically those focusing on non-judgmental present moment awareness, have been shown in functional MRI scans to decrease activity in the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center.
It quiets down the panic.
Right. And over time, consistent meditation physically thickens the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for rational thought and regulating those primitive emotional responses.
So you are literally rewiring the brain's hardware to be less reactive to those Tuesday morning emails.
You're upgrading the system.
You know, what resonates so deeply about these four strategies is that they are entirely accessible.
They really are.
You don't need to quit your job and move to a monastery. The science shows that just taking a micro break or going for a moderate daily walk acts as a literal pressure release valve for that cortisol buildup we talked about.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these aren't just fluffy self-care tips. Taking a micro break or a walk actively shifts your nervous system back to a parasympathetic state.
Which protects your cellular health over the long run.
Absolutely. It increases your HRV, lowers your baseline cortisol, and by removing that hormonal interference, it allows your leptin and ghrelin levels to return to normal.
So you stopped craving the donuts.
Exactly. It restores your natural appetite and metabolic function.
So what does this all mean for us today? Let's recap. We started by diagnosing the three types of stress, observing how chronic stress acts like malware destroying our physical systems.
Right.
We explored how adrenaline and cortisol hijack our biology, how cortisol aggressively redistributes fat to our abdomen and burns through our stomach lining.
The diet stress loop.
Right. We uncovered that leptin-ghrelin trap that ruins our diets. And most importantly, we learned how to use smartwatch HRV tracking and daily habits like micro breaks and sleep to actually take our bodies back.
Managing this biological response is not a luxury.
No, it's not a sign of weakness either. It is a biological necessity. You absolutely must prevent your body from treating your daily life like a constant life or death marathon.
And, consider the rapid evolution of the technology we discussed today.
What do you mean?
Well, if consumer smartwatches can now accurately tell us when our nervous system is overwhelmed, just by measuring the milliseconds between our heartbeats, what does the future of the workplace look like?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Will we soon see a world where your calendar software automatically blocks you from scheduling a meeting because it detects your HRV is just too low, actively protecting your parasympathetic nervous system from further damage?
Wow. An automated digital guardian for your vagus nerve? That is a profound, provocative thought to leave everyone with.
It's coming faster than we think.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the biology of stress. Remember to listen to your body's signals, take that micro break today, and keep learning. We'll catch you next time.